Hello, everyone. My name is Tara Lynn Hughes, Senior Vice President with TD Bank. We're so proud at TD to be the presenting sponsor of Conversations at the Royal. This speaker series is about bringing critical mental health tools, resources, and care to people in need. Never has this been more important. Living through a pandemic has put challenges in front of Canadians that we've never experienced. And every day at TD, I can see it's testing the mental health and emotional well-being of our employees, our customers, and our communities. That's why conversations around wellness and mental health must be a priority. As always, the Royal Ottawa Foundation is standing tall, and I want to thank them for organizing this important series of virtual monthly events. I believe the Royal and TD share common goals, and that's to advance better health and contribute to open, inclusive, respectful, and dignified conversations that promote recovery and break down stigma. Today and every day, we'll continue to stand together, support each other, and be resilient as we move forward in 2021. On behalf of all of us at TD, thank you for your support and for participating in these very meaningful conversations. Take care, everyone, and be well.
And with that, we say good evening, everybody, and welcome back for another Conversations at the Royal. As you just heard, this night is brought to you by our terrific friends at TD. You know, without TD's help and support, we wouldn't be able to put on these types of events and do it for free so that you, the viewer at home, would be able to just log in and register for free and take in what's going to be, we think, another great night talking about mental health. And this time we've got a little bit of a different spin on it. We're going to be talking about the importance of exercise here as we hopefully get into the final portion of the pandemic. You know, this is, I believe, the 5th month in which we've run these virtual series of Conversations at the Royal presented by TD. And over that course of that time, we've had thousands of people from across North America tune in. So we would like to welcome everybody back. If you've been with us before, welcome back. And if you're a newbie, and if you've never joined us before, we want to walk you through this setup. Because for a lot of people, you might be used to Zoom, and you might be used to FaceTime, and you might be used to Microsoft Teams, and you might, whatever, right? We've all been through all of them, but you may not have been through this particular setup here with the Green Room and Brand Live. But it's a really user-friendly setup for you that we have. If at any point you see me buffering or any of our guests are buffering, you feel like it's lagging, go ahead and hit F5, okay? F5, that's going to refresh your screen. That'll probably get you good to go, and you'll be ready to rejoin us as well. We are live, I promise you. It's just after 7 Eastern time on Wednesday. Yes, we actually booked this on a day where there is no Canadian NHL teams playing in a playoff game, but we're live, okay? So it's just after 7 o'clock. And the reason why I'm telling you we're live is because we want you to use the chat feature. So as you look at the bottom of your screen, you're going to see the chat feature. Later in this show, we're going to make this interactive. And I think this has been one of the best parts of Conversations at the Royal presented by TD. It's that interactive element, that live element that we love, and we love to hear from you. So if you have any questions regarding to the connection of mental health and exercise, we've got a panel coming up here. We've got experts, and we would certainly like you to drop us a question. We'll be sure to try and tackle it before the hour is up. And I think I'm kind of in the same boat as all of you on the other side of the screen, where we have really struggled, haven't we, to maintain our usual degree of physical fitness during this pandemic. I think me, for example, I was really good about going to the gym. And here where I am in Ontario and in Ottawa, the gyms got taken away and they got put back, and they got taken away and they got put back. And it's been really hard. And what we're going to do is talk a little bit about that today. We're going to talk about finding ways to stay active. Maybe even if your gyms are closed or your rec softball team isn't going to be going and your hockey team may not be going and things like that nature. We're going to talk about that. And the first guest we're going to bring in here, we've got some great resources for you. But Dr. Natalia Jaworska is going to join us here. And she is a scientist at the Royal Institute of Mental Health, does extensive research around exercise and mental health. As I look here, Natalia, at our two names, I can't help but feel like I see scientist for you. It seems so important, and then it's sports reporter for me. That doesn't. It's quite tilted, and this is why we've got you there. Even though I'm the exercise, I talk about athletes and stuff. This is why we love having you here, is because you're going to give us kind of a scientific feel and view of things. And we'll kick things off by, first of all, just asking, how are you doing on this Wednesday night?
It's so lovely to be here, Ian. I really always love being part of conversations at the Royal. So I think it's such a privilege to be joining you and talking about some of my work. I mean, whenever I get to blab on about science, that makes me pretty darn happy.
Yeah, and it's great. I think what you're really good at is you see the world in a very scientific way, but then you're able to sort of put it into layperson's terms so that, people like us that don't have the scientific background, we can understand it. So let me start with that, because I talked that a big part of your job is you look at the research around mental health and exercise. So just, from a kind of a broad strokes perspective, what has your research kind of shown you?
Yeah, so I mean, I have various types of research programs, but one of the arms is looking at the effects of aerobic exercise in depressed youth. So, I think there's been a lot of talk amongst kids and teenagers and their parents saying, hey, what else can we do for our kids who are maybe struggling with depression or anxiety other than giving them meds, or some of them may not respond to therapy? And exercise has kind of emerged as this interesting candidate. So my role has really been to see, hey, does exercise actually do anything for depressed kids? And near and dear to my heart, what does it do to the brain? So that's super exciting for me.
Yeah, and I think what I think a lot of our viewers would be interested in is exactly if you could maybe walk us through some of your research, because I think it's really interesting to see that connection between cardio, physical fitness, and the effects on our brain.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very stoked to actually be talking about my research, simply because we've all been kind of out of the laboratory for the past year and doing some virtual stuff. So it's really nice to revisit some of the work that I've actually, did at one point when I was back at the facilities, and then I'm really hoping to get back into very, very soon post this pandemic.
Yeah, excellent. Now, I think if fingers crossed here, hopefully this will work from a technical standpoint, but I'm hoping, I think you might even have a little bit of a slideshow for us.
I sure do. So in a really broad perspective, what I'll be talking about is just giving us a bit of a Cole's notes on the impacts of exercise on mood, and with a specific focus on depression. And basically, there's been a lot of anecdotal research, particularly in middle-aged and older adults, that really seems to suggest that exercise and more longer-term aerobic exercise may have mood-elevating effects. So not necessarily in people who are clinically depressed, but in just normal folks. They were reporting that with longer-term exercise, that makes them sweat. And so this is aerobic exercise can be thought of as exercise that uses oxygen by our muscles. That seemed to have some good effects. And so a group of scientists and clinicians started to look at this a little bit more systematically. And there's more and more evidence suggesting that supervised moderate to high intensity cardio exercise that's done pretty regularly might actually be a promising and acceptable treatment option for symptoms of depression. Now, we don't really know if that's also true for youth, but if that is the case, that's actually really exciting, because we know that exercise is relatively feasible. Not everybody needs equipment for it. It can be cost effective, and if it's darn helpful, well, that's super exciting to us. Now, there's been a lot of studies in rodents and monkeys that has actually tried to look at, well, what happens to the body and the brain when somebody engages in regular, longer-term exercise. And some of the stuff that we found is that there's an increase in neurotrophic factors. Now, what the heck is that? They're actually just called neuron-loving molecules, as I like to say. So these are good for our brains. Also, longer-term exercise changes the chemicals that are involved in cognition and mood. So things like serotonin and norepinephrine. Again, these long, complicated names, but essentially these are really important chemicals that support our mental well-being, and they tend to be the chemicals that are changed when we're taking antidepressant drugs. We also find that there's a better stress system regulation, and longer-term stress exposure is no good for our brains, so the more we can kind of rein that in, the better. And there's also a reduction in also penetrate to your brain, so no good. So if you can bring that down with exercise, that's actually a really positive effect. Now, what's really cool is that exercise tends to affect two structures in particular, the hippocampus, which is really important in memory and emotional memory, as well as the prefrontal cortex, which is really important in cognition. And what's sort of important to keep in mind is that these two structures are known to be very, very implicated in depression. So if exercise is actually having an effect on these brain regions that we know are also modulated in depression, that's a really good target to sort of think about when you're thinking about sort of brain health. What's actually even more important is that we know that both the hippocampus and this prefrontal cortex continue to develop in young people. So again, perhaps we might get better bang for our buck if we target individuals who we know their brain activity continues to develop. So I was really interested in actually seeing what happens when we get youth, and these are older youth, they're 18 to 24 years of age, but from a brain perspective, they are indeed considered youth. What happens if we get them to participate in high intensity? So I mean, these kids are working up a sweat, high intensity exercise, and we brought these poor schmucks in. They do have depression, so it wasn't super easy for them, but they came in for 12 weeks, 3 times per week, and they exercised their butts off. And what's really cool, and you can see that in the graph, the slope is going down. And that is basically showing us that they got less depressed to the same extent that we would see with antidepressant pharmacotherapy. What's also really important is that their adherence to the exercise and also compliance, so doing the exercise the way we wanted them to, was really great, suggesting that exercise can be viable and feasible. And most importantly, at least for me, was that the amount of time that they spent in their target heart rate zone, so we had them exercising at a particular intensity, that was actually associated with the extent of their anxiety symptom reductions, suggesting that intensity may matter. So this brings me back to my research that was interrupted, unfortunately, due to COVID, but I do have some great preliminary data based on work that was really trying to tease apart, does intensity matter? So again, we had kids with depression who came in and exercised just like they did before, but then they either exercised at a medium intensity or high intensity. So, you know, sort of a decent workout versus hardcore. Doesn't matter. We need to know that. I don't have enough data to answer that question yet, but we are seeing those really good changes again with their mood. So decreased anxiety, decreased depression, higher self-esteem, those wonderful things that we hope to see with a proper intervention. And I really want to highlight that the fact that there was a decrease in suicidality was shown with exercise. And that to me is really important because at the end of the day, suicide is something that we're all really concerned about in depressed kids. Some of the preliminary data does seem to suggest that perhaps high intensity exercise may actually induce greater changes in the mood symptoms, but this really remains to be seen. So in terms of the take home, I think there's a pretty decent case to say that perhaps dose does matter, but I think, you know, I need to kind of put a bookmark on that and come back to that at a different date. It also appears that supervised exercise that's done at a longer duration versus short bouts may be a little bit better because it just takes a little bit of time for our brains to adapt. But short is good as well. This is a viable intervention under certain conditions. So when there's supervision, I think these kids can really do it. But I don't want to say that it's a panacea. It's not for everyone, but I think there's a certain group of youths that can really benefit from this. Now, my lingering question is what happens to the brain? And we've only started to scratch the surface, but I really hope to have some answers for you next time. So, Ian, I'm not sure if that was pseudo clear or if there's certain questions that have emerged from that. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, you know what? I think that was really interesting. And I think what we're going to find is, and I'm sure you have already seen this, is that, I think a lot of youth are dealing with mental health issues now, and it's certainly been magnified by the pandemic. Mm-hmm. But I think, and listen, I'm going to speak very selfishly here. I get the opportunity to coach 12 and 13-year-old girls in ringette, and it's my favorite thing in the world. But my biggest concern is, that age, 12, 13, 14, that's when girls, we lose them. They stop being interested in sports.
Yeah.
I feel like your presentation that you just had there, I almost feel like after this is done, I'm going to probably email you and say, like, I'm going to need those slides, and I'm going to send them to all the parents of the kids that I coach. And I say, look, we need to do this because I think that we have a mental health crisis. And I think this is exactly what we need to be doing, is finding that link between exercise and mental health, and the fact that you can actually tangibly show. I think that my favorite thing from your presentation there was that graph where you showed you could see the depression coming down over a 12-week period. And that's not using, I understand that there might be parents that are reluctant or resistant to putting their kids on medication. We understand that. But if you're looking for an alternative, like, to me, we need to be pushing this type of messaging in the media, and we need to be pushing this all over the place, because I think we're on the precipice, if we're not there already, of a mental health crisis with kids that are kind of between the ages of 10 and 18.
Yeah. I completely agree. I mean, one of the things that occurs frequently is a clinician will come back to us and they're like, we need some hard proof. So I think, our job as scientists is to come up with that hard proof and also answer some of these questions of, does intensity matter? So, I mean, my partner is a physician. If he's going to prescribe exercise, he needs to know, what do I tell them? Does it matter if they're stretching or if they're running? Like, if both work, then should we not allow that flexibility? And I don't think we have a great response to that quite yet, but I think we're getting some clues. And I also don't think it's going to be black and white. I think some people will benefit from hardcore cardio that it engages, kind of team sports, for instance, because they might be more extroverted, and then other people might just prefer doing yoga, and that's okay. So there's I think also going to be a customization of the intervention, but I think pushing the messaging forward that actually we do have some emerging data that actually shows some pretty tangible effects. I think it's really worthwhile, because we don't want people to feel hopeless. And I think exercise can be quite empowering as a tool that a teen can use to kind of take command of their mental health. At least that's what some of the teens have said to me, and that feels really good.
Yeah, and exactly. And I think, like I said, we need to be kind of pushing that message forward. And I really like your message too of, it's not a one size fits all. It's not maybe 30 minutes of cardio for person A is of high intensity cardio for person A might be better 75 minutes of low intensity going for a super long walk for person B, and it's totally different. I think one of the big issues, and I think I tried to lay this out earlier, is that I used to love going to the gym. Natalia, I used to love going to the gym in the pre-pandemic world. I think I had created I finally created a nice routine for myself, and then it feels like it's gone, and it's really hard to do. So I think one of the challenges people are having, and I know that we're slowly getting out of this stay at home, and I guess if you're a pickleball enthusiast, it's a pretty good week to be in Ontario. But beyond that, there's not a ton of things you can do. So one of the questions I think I'd like to ask you is, so like, what's your message to a person who maybe they're at home, they don't love the treadmill, they don't, like, how can that person stay physically fit and sort of tie it to their mental health?
Right. So, I mean, I'm not a coach, but I've worked with a lot of people who have some expertise and good tips and just a lot of feedback from my own experiences. I think to integrate it within your day-to-day existence is always a good strategy. So make it easy on yourself. And I mean, the pandemic has posed so many challenges for all of us. But, sometimes if you can take a phone call and go for a walk versus sitting in front of Zoom, hey, that's a pretty easy alternative. If you can take the stairs, if you can walk to the grocery store or the convenience store, something that just isn't yet another thing you need to do, that's super, super important, because otherwise it can be super challenging for some individuals. And then the second thing is being honest with yourself. So sort of understanding your own personal boundaries, what works, what doesn't. So Ian, it's great that you love the gym. I hate the gym. So, but you need to identify that, right? Because it's like, okay, I'm not going to go to the gym, but then what are you going to do? And it's like, well, I like biking, I like yoga, I like running. Okay, cool. If you are somebody, as I said, who's extroverted and really likes team sports, go for it. I am not coordinated, so I've never felt comfortable being in team sports because I'm the person who drops the ball. So, like it can be fun, but not my thing. So I think just identifying what works for you and making it as seamless as it can be within your life is always a great strategy. And then it sets a baseline where you can take it up a notch.
I guess my final question for you is, and you kind of laid out some of your research and your graphs. Like, what's your next goal? Like, where do you want to take your research as it pertains to exercise and mental health?
I really think I need to at least try to get some insight into the intensity question, because that's the one that I get asked the most. So essentially people are always asking me, hey, is a HIIT regimen better, or is yoga stretching better? And I think there's probably benefits to both, but they might have slightly different mechanisms of action that lead to symptom alleviation. And so by understanding the brain and focusing a little bit more on the biology in addition to the clinical outcomes, that's one of my main goals. And also, how do we boost adherence? That's, that I work with great collaborators for that who have more of psychological tricks and stuff like that. But we know that exercise is hard. So even if I come up with great evidence that this is good for you, we still need depressed folks to exercise in order to get the benefits. And that's just darn hard, because depression is sort of characterized by the fact that you're not exactly having the best motivation. So what tools can we use to maybe get people, up and going? And I think there's many, many avenues for me to explore that question.
Well, listen, this was great, and we're going to explore some more questions with you, because we're leaving you for now, but you're coming back. And Dr. Natalia Jaworska, thanks so much for doing this, and we'll see you again in a few minutes. And we want to remind everybody, if you have a question for Dr. Jaworska, fire it into our chat box there. So we'll take your questions live. I think that was just a really fascinating, really interesting presentation from Natalia, where she very clearly laid out the connection between exercise and mental health. And maybe you have a personal question about your own situation, a child situation, somebody else in your life, whatever it is, fire it into that chat box. We'll give ourselves 10, 15 minutes at the end of this program up until about 8 o'clock Eastern time, and we will answer those questions. Our next guest was so busy, she couldn't join us live here on this Wednesday. We actually had to pre-tape this interview. That's because, and you'll forgive her, because she is simply known as Ottawa's top doctor. Dr. Vera Etches has become a fixture on our television screens or radio stations, you name it. Probably 18 months ago, you had no idea who Dr. Vera Etches is, and now she's arguably as recognizable as anybody in our city. And earlier this week, I had a chance to have a conversation with Dr. Etches all about this same topic of exercise and mental health. Well, our guest here absolutely does not need any introduction. In fact, Dr. Vera Etches has become one of those faces and voices that has become a constant on our television screens and over the radio over the last 15 months or so. And as we bring you into this conversation here, Dr. Etches, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to talk a little bit about mental health and its importance here during the pandemic. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you. It's very important.
Well, as I mentioned, look, you have become the face of Ottawa Public Health, and I think a question a lot of people would have as well would be like, how are you holding up during all of this? I can imagine you've got late nights and you've got stress and you've got media appearances, and I can only imagine the amount of stress that is on your shoulders these days. How is Dr. Vera Etches holding up just from a personal standpoint?
Well, thanks for asking. I do feel it's helpful to others to sometimes describe that it can get very challenging. I have the privilege of ongoing employment and a supportive family, which definitely helps. And I think though, even that, those supports, it still can be hard. It can feel like you're tired, it's hard to carry on. And so, I actually do think that physical activity is one of the things that's making a difference in my life. And, making sure I'm very intentional about that to make sure it still happens, that's been one of my key coping strategies.
So let's talk a little bit about your routine then, as you talk about you've made it a priority. So what does that look like for you? Is that running? Is that working out at home? What do you kind of do to kind of stay in shape and try to stay mentally sharp using exercise?
Well, it is running for me, because I find that's the easiest thing, is just to go out the door in the morning. But I am someone who still needs to make it easier for myself to overcome that inertia. And so I tend to put my running stuff together in a pile the night before, so that it's easier in the morning. It's no excuse. There you go. And I tend to also make it obvious to myself with kind of it's not really a reward, but a bit of accountability by marking on my calendar when I run, so I can see if there are any gaps, and that shows me, it's time to get back out there again. But we have such numerous trails, like multi-use paths in Ottawa. That's usually I head out from the house to one of those trails, and it is it's getting warmer. So trying to find what works for you is the most important thing, and walking at a vigorous pace is a great form of exercise that most people are able to do. So really encourage people to find what works for them.
Yeah. And, it's funny because last year during the pandemic, I tried to take up my running. My wife runs and done some half marathons. And I tried, Dr. Etches, and I got to 10K. And then it was like, it was my body reminding me, hey, you're in your 40s. You can't just get up and run. So I've had to alter it a little bit. And, it's too much of a grind. But I think you make a really good point, which is we're very fortunate to live in a community like Ottawa, where we've got so much green space that, whether it's the Parkway or the canal, or even, I live in the south end of the city in Barhaven, there's trails everywhere. And, exercising doesn't have to be, I'm going to the gym and I'm lifting 200 pounds and I think it's really important that an active lifestyle, Dr. Etches, is possible, even though we've been in a really tough spot here in the last few weeks in the province of Ontario.
Certainly, some people are missing the gym, that was their routine, and trying to find new ways that work for them. And others are realizing, without having to commute as much and spend as much time in the car to and from work, that it opens up new possibilities for physical activity. There's no question that it's hard when people are socially isolated. So that has been a barrier where people like to exercise together. I think that we're going to come back into a time where outdoor activities in small groups continue to be part of what will be possible. Until now, these days, right now, we're still suggesting people do maintain distance from people outside their household as much as possible. So that accountability or that friendship with someone to support your physical activity can sometimes be virtual, checking in afterwards, saying, hey, I made it out, how about you? Those kinds of things can make a difference also.
And as we start to wrap up this conversation, obviously we're having this conversation with the backdrop of mental health. And I just want to ask you a little bit about if you've seen a shift in the last 15 months during this pandemic, and kind of how mental health is maybe, unfortunately, it kind of got pushed to the back burner because COVID, I think, has dominated so much of the landscape here, so to speak, in the last 15 months. But it feels like there's been it's been really taxing on people's mental health. And I'm just wondering how you've seen that sort of transpire over the past 15 months or so.
Absolutely. Mental health has been a concern for us throughout, initially with people's employment being affected so drastically and ongoing for children and youth who've missed the social support of schools. So really across all age groups, older adults who've been isolated. getting outdoors, especially outdoors in nature, can make a big difference in terms of being able to restore a sense of being more well. And if people are in crisis, we always encourage people to get help and support. There's help available, but doing what we can ourselves to maintain some sense of well-being through physical activity makes a difference. And it's something we can encourage across our families and friends groups to support each other to get through to where we do have better days ahead.
And as we wrap up, and you mentioned better days ahead, I would imagine this has been really tough on you. I think every time you've had to get in front of the cameras or do interviews, you've unfortunately been the bearer of bad news in the last 15 months. But I would feel like maybe, just maybe, we're starting to get a little bit of better news. And so I would just imagine from your perspective, I know it's moving at a glacial pace and not at the pace that some people would like, but I would imagine that sitting in your shoes, you've got to be excited about what lays ahead in the next 6 and 12 months, and that maybe the next time that you're up in front of a press conference and you're delivering news, it's not all doom and gloom. And that has to probably feel pretty rewarding for you too.
Yes, I think for people who have been vaccinated, we can definitely start to relax, and those days, those guidelines are coming as the proportion of the population that's vaccinated grows. We'll be able to benefit from that in terms of the options, increased options for physical activity as well, and that hope is important. That's also important for our health.
Yeah, hope. That's a word we haven't heard too often in the last 15 months. So it's nice to hear those words coming right out of your mouth. Dr. Vera Etches, thank you so much. I think I tried to convey this. I'll convey it again. You've had a thankless job in the last 15 months, and I think you've handled it with a lot of grace and dignity. And you had to make some unpopular decisions, but you did it for our benefit. So I appreciate you taking some time here to have this conversation with us, and we wish you all the best here in the months ahead. And stay safe. And we're looking forward to actually seeing you in person at some point down the road.
Thank you. Thank you for promoting mental health.
And there we go. Little conversation with Dr. Vera Etches. And can you tell I'm not in TV anymore? Like, what was going on there with my head? I didn't even have myself framed up there properly. But thanks again to Dr. Vera Etches for doing that with me a few days ago. And it's nice to hear her use the word hope and hearing that come right out of her lips. Hey, just to kind of recap Dr. Vera Etches and kind of her highlights here. I thought it was really important when she said, be intentional. Have your shoes ready, set it up the night before. Don't give yourself an excuse. Because I think if you wake up, it's so easy to hit that. We all hit the snooze button, right? At least one time, if not two or three. But if your running shoes are at the door, maybe it doesn't give you a chance to back out of it. So make that plan. And I really like this. And I think, Dr. Jaworska also mentioned this. Find out what works for you. Like maybe going for a 10K run, that's not going to work for you, but maybe going for a 45-minute brisk walk, it is. And I think that's really important. And I love the idea of a support group, and whether it's with somebody from your household, check in with a friend, and even the fact that it feels like we're slowly getting to the point where maybe we can connect with people outdoors again. These are great things, and the support group is important. And then the last point, which is really important, is if you're in real trouble, if you're in a real crisis, you should be obviously seeking immediate help. We talk about things that work for you. I tried running. I honestly did. It didn't work for me. I did get to a 10K. Last summer, I ran a 10K with my wife, and then ended up having all sorts of knee and hip and back issues. This is what happens when you're in your 40s. But not everyone's like that. Tracy Shouldice isn't like that. Running absolutely, positively works for Tracy. And we're going to bring Tracy right into the conversation here on this Wednesday. Tracy, first of all, thanks so much for doing this. How are you on this Wednesday?
I am doing very well. Thanks for having me in.
Hey, listen, let's talk a little bit about your running history, your connection with the Royal, and how did you start getting into running to the point? I know you're a big part with Run Ottawa, and you're so involved in the running community here. Where did this all start from?
It's funny. It all started in 2010. So I started running relatively late. You're in your 40s. I'm in my 50s. I'm in my late 50s. So I was 46 when I started. And it was all because a good friend of my wife was a runner, and she convinced me to go out for a run with her and try it out. And I got to tell you, at first, I wasn't sure I was going to like it. And then we entered a race. So she said, let's get in this race. So it was a 5K race in October that year. And being in the crowd and feeling the energy of the crowd and everything, I was hooked before the gun even went. So after that race, before I was even done, I'm like, I want to do more of these races. So since then, I've done, 3 marathons. I'm doing one more. We'll talk about that in a minute this weekend. I've probably done 30 half marathons. That's my favorite distance. And probably 100 or more 5K and 10K races. And I also like to fundraise as part of my running too. So I try to combine the something that's good for me with something that's good for the community.
So all those, you're telling me all of those races you just listed, you started at 40, that's been since the age of 46?
Yeah, my first marathon, I was 50. It was my 50th birthday kind of celebration to me to prove I could do this. And and that was a lot of fun.
Okay, well then listen, that gives me, I got a couple of years to get there, but you know what, I'll use you as a little bit of motivation. So hey, maybe you could tell our audience a little bit about the benefits that you find and you talked about maybe the adrenaline rush. Obviously, if you're running at a big event, and hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll get back to those. But I know that there's, people talk about the runner's high,
Yes.
endorphins, and all the things, the adrenaline that goes through. Tell us how you feel after you've done maybe a 5K or a 10K run.
Yeah. And the first thing I'll say, I'll echo what Dr. Etches said, which is it doesn't have to be a run. People can get a lot of these benefits from just walking, right? Getting outside, taking a walk your dog, go for a walk with a friend at a safe distance, that kind of thing. But there are physical and mental benefits. And this is a beautiful thing about running. They both kind of intersect. You accrue benefits physically and mentally. On the physical side, I'm actually 15 pounds lighter than I was a year ago. I didn't do it on purpose. It was just because part of my COVID behavior was, hey, if I'm feeling stressed, if I'm feeling anxious, I'll go out for a run. So I started running a little bit more frequently and adding more volume to my runs every week. So I lost some weight, right? So a lot of people have gained weight during COVID. I managed to lose it, and I feel great about that. My heart rate, everybody knows that it's good for your heart. So my resting heart rate is lower, which is great for my longevity. I had 2 parents that both had heart issues when they were in their 60s and 70s. I'd like to not repeat that and hope that, my running now will help me have a longer and healthier life. And then on the mental side, full disclosure, I suffer from anxieties, right? I have some generalized anxieties. They can twist me up a little bit. And then when I run, though, it all kind of sheds off of me. So when I run, I don't wear a headset. I don't listen to music. I just run. I listen to my breathing. I listen to my feet hitting the ground. And what I find is after 1 or 2 kilometers into a run, all of the worries I've had, they've all just kind of been left behind. And all I am is just super, I'm not a Zen kind of guy, but I am as close to mindful, I think, as I can get when I'm doing a long run, especially. It just puts me in a really good place. And when I get home, my wife and my son, they're like, Dad, you're like a changed guy when you come home. You're so happy and perky. So I definitely get that endorphin rush from the running too. And I work in high tech, so my job is stressful. Typically, I have 6 or 7 Zoom calls in a day. So by 4 o'clock, my brain is mush. My body's feeling a little bit, down because I've been slouched in a chair all day. I'll just go out, run 3 or 4K around Carp here where I live. And that just resets me and gets me ready to be with my family at the end of my workday. So there's a ton of benefits there. And then finally, I've met so many friends and supportive people in the Ottawa running community. It truly is amazing. And that's also good for your mental state too.
Yeah, I love that story that you'll come home and your family will say you look and sound like a different person, and that's great. I think that's exactly what Dr. Jaworska was talking about, and Dr. Etches is that find what works for you, and it's great. I love the fact too you mentioned, Tracy, that you like to work a fundraising component into it. You're very proudly wearing your Royal shirt tonight. Let's talk a little bit about how you got involved with the Royal and why this is kind of a near and dear initiative to you.
Yeah, interestingly, it started with a connection with a family friend. In 2017, a woman that my family knew since I was 5 years old. She was a lifelong career nurse at the Royal, and she worked in what they call their concurrent disorders unit, which is a unit where they help people that are dealing both with the mental health challenge and a substance abuse challenge. Sometimes they go hand in hand. And she had worked there for her entire career. And she was about to retire. And then after she retired, she got cancer. And she was quite ill in the fall of 2016. And unfortunately, she died. At the same time that was happening, I was looking to set up a marathon in 2017. I was going to try to run the Ottawa Marathon. And I thought maybe I could, as a nod to her, in her honor, run it in her honor and maybe work with the Royal to raise a little bit of money. So I called up the Royal, I got contacted with some of their folks, talked to them, and I got a really good vibe for what the Royal stands for, right? The services they do in the community around clinical in and outpatient services, research on the brain, like Dr. Natalie was talking about, and then also the advocacy that they do for people that suffer from mental health challenges, right? So I was like full in once I learned about all of that. So since then, every year in race weekend, I've run for the Royal and raised some money. At work a few years ago, we did a big fundraiser where I nominated the Royal, and we made about $56,000 for the hospital, which was really rewarding. And I'm also a captain for the Shoppers Run for Women's Mental Health event, which the Royal sponsors every year, and that money goes to the Royal. I've been doing that for 3 years, so I guess it's fair to say I'm all in with the Royal.
Yeah, I you know what? We'll make sure we push that again, because that's coming up around the corner. The Run for Women's Health coming up, and you mentioned Shoppers Drug Mart, a big part of that. So this is a huge weekend in Ottawa, right? This is race weekend, where traditionally we get tens of thousands of people lined up on the streets. It's been 2 years since we've had that, but what's race weekend looking like? It's nice that this humidity's broke. It looks like it's going to break for you for the weekend, because I'm thinking if you had what you had yesterday and today, that's going to be a tough go. But what does the Ottawa race weekend look like for you? And what's your route? Like running the route? Have they altered everything to kind of fit the COVID guidelines?
Yeah, so in the virtual race, you can pick your own date, you can pick your own course, which is great. You can also pay an eye to the weather, which I have been obsessively. And yes, it's going to be really nice on Saturday. So my course is out here on this visual. I'm going to start actually at my front door in Carp. And I'm going to do what they call a point-to-point, which means I don't turn around and come back. I just keep going. So I start in Carp. I'm going to start at 7 o'clock sharp Saturday morning. And then I'm going to wend my way through North Canada. So I'm going to run from Carp into Canada. I'm going to head down March Road and jump on what they call the Watts Creek Pathway, which is a shared bike walking path. That takes me about 10 to 15 kilometers into the Bayshore area, where I then just cross Carling Avenue and I get on the Ottawa River Pathway. And then that takes me all the way downtown. So once I get past the War Museum, I'll go up the Wellington Street Hill, past Parliament, over to Elgin, down to the NAC, down to the back of the NAC. I jump on the canal there. I do a little bit of what they call an out and back on the canal. And then I will finish right behind Lisgar Collegiate, right off the Queen Elizabeth driveway, hopefully by about 11:10 a.m., which is my plan. Just a little over 4 hours. I'm going to take my time this year and not push myself too hard and enjoy the experience. And I'm really lucky in that I've got some friends that are helping me out along the way too. They've offered to be on the course, cheer me on. Some of them are probably going to run a little bit with me at the end. I've got water stations set up. My wife and my son will be there at the end to pick me up and drive me home, because I won't be able to walk probably when I'm done. So that's what it's going to look like for me Saturday morning.
Yeah, all I could think about was the logistics. Like, I'm pretty sure he's thought ahead that somebody's going to pick him up from Lisgar Collegiate after he's run 42 kilometers. Okay, final question for you. You've run the 42K on Saturday. Please tell me you're going to splurge and have like a cheat meal Saturday night, Tracy. What's on the menu here?
A heavy guy like me, I'm a fairly big bone guy. I'll probably lose 7-8 pounds easily running this thing. And I will be, I find right after I'm done, I'm not hungry. I'm really thirsty, but I'm not hungry. But what I'll probably do is I'll probably have a big pizza. The Carp Pizza place here in town is really good. And I'll probably order a big pizza, watch a hockey game. I'm sure you might be too. Maybe have a beer with my pizza, because I'm known to be a bit of a beer aficionado. So yeah, I'm going to definitely enjoy myself Saturday evening.
Well, it's well-deserved. And listen, we appreciate all the support. Taking some time to talk with us today about what running has meant for you. And then more importantly, talking about your relationship with the Royal and mental health. Tracy, thanks so much for doing this, and best of luck with that run on Saturday.
Thank you so much, Ian. Take care.
Hey, that was fantastic. And I think when I just in my mind thinking about driving from Carp to City Hall basically seems like a long drive, let alone doing the run. So that's amazing that Tracy's able to do that. As I promised, we were going to open up the chat box here. And we're going to bring Dr. Natalia Jaworska right back into the mix here to conclude our program here as we close in on 8 o'clock Eastern time. Welcome back, Natalia.
Hey, it's so nice to be back, and I'm so inspired after Tracy. If I do 7K, I'm like, oh yeah, that was wonderful. Hearing him, with his crazy route, you're like, okay, Natalia, you can't complain at all. So thank you so much for that, Tracy. I think you pumped up a lot of people.
Yeah, and I think a cool message too is that, hey, listen, it's not like he was running since he was a teenager. He's like, I picked it up in my mid-40s, so that was great. Okay, no surprise. Inbox is full. Ready to go? Here we go. We got a whole bunch of questions. You can fire them in. Just type them into the chat box. We'll try to get to as many as possible before we hit the top of the hour. This one comes in from Todd. And Todd wants to know, Natalia, is there such thing as a runner's high?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So that one is asked quite a lot. I personally do not experience it. I think my mother certainly does. I'm sure Tracy does as well. So there is a known effect when you go kind of hardcore. You can get endorphin release and other modulations in different chemicals. So for some people, yes, but it's not a guarantee. So not everyone experiences as far as we can tell. But I think it's one of those projects that I really need to actually scientifically measure because I keep on getting questions about it. But to the best of our knowledge, some people can certainly experience it. Others, like me, are just like, yeah, that was okay.
So we're just going to kind of rip through the questions here because there's so many here. Okay,
let's do it.
We got a question in here. Someone said, I was really hoping tonight I could learn some strategies of how a person who's suffering from depression would be able to get motivated to exercise. So I think that's a big issue, yeah. Right? Like people want to do it, but sometimes they lack the motivation. So this person's wondering, what kind of strategies can you get to maybe get over that initial hurdle?
Ian, that is such a great question because full disclosure, the work that I do with youth is very specific to youth that are not super severely depressed. I mean, some of them can be, but they need to be non-medicated in order to be involved in our research because we're trying to see, what exercise does and having medication may kind of confound that. So the truth is, if somebody's suffering from, really severe depression, they probably wouldn't be the best candidate because let's be realistic, it is almost impossible to find that motivation. So, that's one caveat that I'd like to say. However, sometimes our youth have really bad days too. That's just the nature of depression. Some days are going to be better than others. So what we find that works the best is a supervised intervention. So there is accountability to us, the researchers and our staff, our students, to get these kids going. So we do a lot of text reminders, we do a lot of emailing, we do a lot of phone calling, but we're also flexible. So if a teen comes in and they're having just a really crummy day, we just say, just do your best. So I think, as the others have mentioned, having a certain degree of, accountability, like Dr. Etches says, for a person might be an important source. And also taking, cues from your own day. Like some days you might have a little bit more motivation. Try to ride that. And whether it's 5 minutes or not, perhaps that might build on it. But it's also okay when you're having a super low day, acknowledging that, no, you're not going to exercise and not feeling bad about it. Because the last thing a depressed individual needs is to feel bad about something else in their lives. And that is exactly what we're trying not to do.
Yeah, that's really good advice there at the end, is that you don't want to add another layer, add another 5 or 10 pounds in that backpack that you're carrying around. Here's another question, I think, and maybe you would have some insight onto this. Is there research that has looked at the effects of physical activity on mood in children with ADHD who are also exhibiting some symptoms of depression?
I don't know offhand, so that's my caveat. However, we do know that there has been some work in children with ADHD and so I don't know if they have depression or not, but children with ADHD, as exercise is a coping strategy, and it does seem to be effective. Now, I've also worked with youth who may have had ADHD as children, and now they've managed it better. And I've also had a lot of sort of anecdotal conversations with them saying, hey, sports is actually a good outlet for some of these hyperactive tendencies that I have. It's not for everyone, but certainly I think there's parents who can kind of recognize that if there's a lot of hyperactivity, engaging kids and youth in sports may be a really beneficial add-on to medication, or maybe starting there and therapy. So for certain ADHD, and exercise have been shown to be beneficial. The truth is, though, it just needs to be a little bit more sustained. So you can't just necessarily go one time and that's it. It's more of that getting into a routine, having a habit of that release, engaging in something more regularly. Those are the types of interventions that tend to work a little bit better. So it doesn't require a little bit of an investment, unfortunately.
Okay, we're going to keep inviting people. Get your questions in. We got about 10 more minutes to go here with Dr. Jaworska. This question comes in, and this is from Sarah, who wants to know, does the amount of physical activity change based on our age?
So that's actually a really great question in terms of whether you require more physical activity in order to get the same benefits or less. I don't know about quantity, but I think probably what you can do with age might change to a certain extent. I mean, there's people like Tracy who have amazing cardiovascular fitness and they're good. But a lot of individuals that, start to age, and Ian, you even made mention of it, like, you can't necessarily bounce back as quickly as before. And that's certainly the case with me. There's just going to be some physical limitations. So how much you push your cardiovascular fitness does change with age, simply because there's other physiological and safety barriers that take effect, which is why actually you don't actually need to push yourself as much when you're older in order to get the same cardiovascular fitness, because you can attain a higher intensity by pushing yourself a little bit less than as you did when you were in your 30s. So it probably does go down on average, but there's some wonderful individuals that are total superstars. So there's always an individual component to these kinds of answers.
Yeah, well, and maybe along those lines, Mike wants to know, is there a minimum or maximum amount of time we should get our heart rates up to feel a positive impact on our mental health?
Oh, these questions are so good, and I wish I had the answers to all of them. So longer is always a little bit better. So, I guess if you go for 3 minutes, that's wonderful. You might get some immediate effects, but you need to sustain it for a little bit in order to actually make some more permanent biological changes. So I don't know if I could say, okay, 30 minutes per day is kind of an optimal time. I think that does vary from person to person. There's more and more research also on high intensity interval training where you're going in short little bursts across, a session of 30 minutes. So that really intense cardio isn't super long, but it is still spaced out over 30 or 60 minutes, something like that. So, I would generally say, based on the research, we typically do a 30-minute intervention per session at a kind of moderate to higher intensity interval. I think the more confident answer I can give, it's actually how long you train for from, the perspective of, weeks or months. So if you can sustain that intervention for longer, that seems to have a more longer lasting effect on your brain.
Okay, well said. Like you said, I like how you preface every question with, "Ooh, I wish I could answer," and then you go off and you give us a super detailed, thoughtful answer. So this is great. Jennifer wants to know, do you have an opinion on cardio versus weight training when talking about exercise, and are both equally good and effective when talking about benefits for mental health?
Really good question. So I have to be very sciencey here, but the data is actually kind of mixed on weight training or resistance training. That's essentially what we're talking about. So weights, that kind of exercise. So there's less evidence for the benefits of resistance or weight training from a mental health benefit perspective, but that doesn't mean that it's not good. It's just less studied because you can sort of control cardiovascular intervention a little bit better. So I can have a heart rate monitor on my kid and say, hey, I want you to exercise at such and such intensity. While with weights, it's a little bit more difficult to standardize. And another caveat, which I think is sort of important to mention is, some of the brain changes that I was discussing come from animal research. And actually, rat research is kind of an important source of information for us. And you can get a rat to go on a wheel, and they actually kind of love it because they're like, yep, this is something for me to do. And so then we can kind of assess, what does wheel running, a very cardio-intensive sort of intervention for a rat, well, what does that do? But we don't have an equivalent for little weights for rats. So that's another reason why we actually just don't have as much intervention. So based on what we know, I think it's pretty darn good, but right now the evidence is more in favor of the more aerobic cardio style, just because there's more of it and it can be studied a little bit better. But hey, if weights works for you, by all means go with that.
Okay, now I need to know, is that where the term gym rat comes from?
I would love to say that scientists take credit for this, but I don't know.
And then picturing these little tiny dumbbells that you're putting together for the rat. That's amazing. Okay, a couple of other ones real quick before we wrap up. Jamie wants to know, when we exercise, Dr. Jaworska, do we feel those changes in our brain immediately?
So, you can get that runner's high, and some of those chemicals can kind of hit your brain right away. But in terms of the ones that I was describing, like changes in our neurons or like the brain cells and the connections between brain regions and even sprouting different blood vessels, that takes time. So that cannot occur immediately in a long-lasting way. However, there are some kind of acute effects that do occur, and then so there's sort of slightly different mechanisms of action underlying both things.
Okay, we'll sneak two more questions in here. This question comes in from Ashley, who wants to know if there is. Oh no, sorry, this one isn't from Ashley. This one's from Julie. I apologize for that. How can we motivate teens who are less inclined to exercise? And they're feeling very tired with depression. And I know you kind of touched on this earlier with the other question, but is there a specific strategy for teenagers who might not be feeling motivated to exercise while dealing with depression?
Oh, it's the question of motivation is so big. As I said, accountability works for some folks. Just checking in on them, making them actually be like, hey, you want to do this or not, and not. Sometimes prodding them might help. Sometimes it's not helpful, but sometimes it does. And I think you kind of have to understand your own kid a little bit. Engaging in things that come naturally and easily. So, if they want to see friends, why not, do something outdoors, whatever it might be. Go shoot some hoops, so go for a walk, run. It's kind of great. I'm currently in Montreal, and I'm always seeing a bunch of teens on the bike path just biking around, having a good time. They're annoying for me when I'm running, but I'm like, yes, you're doing the exact right thing. So kind of incorporating things that naturally would work within their sphere anyways. And also as a parent, if there's something that works for you guys as a family and you can engage the youth, even if it's something small, small concessions go a long way. Hey, do you want to just walk over to the corner store with me? Yeah, good enough. So I think building it within their own routine and catering to normal kind of teen tendencies, which are very variable, is kind of the way to go.
Okay, and a final question for you, and maybe you'll have an answer to this, and maybe you won't. We have one of you viewer wondering, do you have any clinical trials that I can participate in?
Well, we are hoping to resume research at the Royal very soon, but of course we all need to be vaccinated, so that's been sort of on the back burner right now. But we will be resuming the depression trial in the teens very soon as we can get back that is one that's kind of open for recruitment, and that's been, of a lot of interest, especially from the universities, because kids are struggling, and so having something that they can cling on to, it's been a source of hope and really something wonderful that we can do, hopefully.
Yeah, well, that was, again, like, we can get back to that stage where we're doing clinical trials and people are inside the Royal and undergoing testing and stuff. We feel like we're getting closer, and maybe 12 months from now we can be there. Dr. Jaworska, thanks so much for doing double duty here. Not only giving your presentation earlier in the hour, but coming back and handling all of these questions. I think your insight, like I said before, I think you're able to put it in just layperson's terms, which is super easy for us. You use the word sciencey. So for non-sciencey people, you did a great job of explaining it, and I think it's just nice and easy for us to digest. So thanks so much for taking the time and sharing your expertise with our audience tonight.
Thank you so much, Ian. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was great. And a big thanks to Dr. Vera Etches as well, and to Tracy Shouldice. And Tracy mentioned that he's going to be running in that the Run for the Women. That comes up July the 11th, and that is supporting women's mental health for the Royal. We're still looking for about 1,000 more people to participate in that event. So they want to get to the goal to about 6,000 people. Please consider captaining a team. You can register at runforwomen.ca. And just a little reminder here, you got a couple of days grace. That registration fee goes up. It increases after June the 1st. So if you can slide in there, get a team in the next 4 or 5 days, that would be amazing. And Run for Women's Mental Health. That'll put a bow on this edition of Conversations at the Royal presented by TD. We thank you for being so engaged and submitting those questions. And until we see you again, hopefully, fingers crossed in person, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.